At 2:46 p.m. on March 11, 2011, Japan physically moved. Within minutes, an entire coastline disappeared. Cars were swallowed whole, airports became islands, and cities burned. More than 18,000 people would never come home. But what makes this disaster different isn't just the scale. It's that we watched it happen, live. Security cameras, news helicopters, cell phones. For the first time in history, the world saw a mega tsunami unfold in real time. This is the story of the day the ground shook, the ocean rose, and modern Japan faced one of the worst disasters in human history. That afternoon, about 80 miles off Japan's northeastern coast, the seafloor suddenly ruptured. The earthquake measured magnitude 9.0. The most powerful ever recorded in the country's history. To understand that scale, you have to understand what a megathrust earthquake actually is. Japan sits above a massive subduction zone where the Pacific plate dives beneath the North American plate at roughly 3 inches per year. That movement doesn't happen slowly. The plates lock together, pressure builds silently over centuries, and eventually the fault gives way in a violent release. In this case, a section of fault roughly 300 miles long and 150 miles wide slipped all at once. Parts of the seabed lurched upward nearly 30 feet, while the shaking lasted 6 full minutes. In Tokyo, nearly 230 miles away, skyscrapers swayed like metronomes, office workers crouched under desks, and ceilings collapsed. Japan's early warning system activated within seconds. Phones blared alarms, trains performed automatic emergency stops, and factory lines shut down. Millions received precious seconds of warning before the strongest shaking arrived. Those seconds saved lives, but offshore, something far worse was forming. When that enormous section of seafloor thrust upward, it displaced a massive column of ocean water. Along the northeastern coast of Honshu, the sea began behaving unnaturally. It pulled back, harbors drained, and fish flopped on exposed seabed. Some residents stepped outside to watch, unaware of what that retreat meant. Then, the horizon darkened. The tsunami waves exceeded 40 feet in many areas. In the city of Miyako, waters surged to a staggering 133 feet above sea level, one of the highest tsunami run-ups ever recorded. In Sendai, the wave pushed miles inland. Sendai Airport vanished beneath black water while aircraft floated and collided like toys. What makes the footage so disturbing isn't dramatic crashing waves, it's the steadiness. The water advances with terrifying patience. Cars attempt to drive away, traffic slows, then stops completely while disappearing beneath churning debris. Entire houses float briefly, intact before splintering apart. More than 470,000 people were evacuated. Over 120,000 buildings were completely destroyed. Entire towns were erased so completely that only foundation outlines remained. One of the most heartbreaking realities investigators later uncovered was how many victims were elderly. Coastal towns in Tōhoku had aging populations. When evacuation warnings sounded, younger residents often fled quickly to higher ground. Many older residents gathered belongings first, some waited for family members, and some physically could not move fast enough. The tsunami arrived in as little as 30 minutes. In some communities, designated evacuation buildings were overtopped. In others, hills once considered safe proved too low. Many who survived the earthquake never escaped the water. When the earthquake struck, nuclear reactors along the coast automatically shut down as designed. One of those facilities was the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Shutting down stops the nuclear reaction, but it does not stop heat generation. Fuel rods must be continuously cooled, and that cooling requires electricity. The tsunami flooded backup generators positioned behind seawalls designed for smaller historical waves. Power was lost, cooling failed, and over the following days, 3 reactor cores melted down. Hydrogen gas built up and exploded, blasting apart outer reactor buildings and images broadcast worldwide. It became the worst nuclear incident since the Chernobyl disaster. More than 150,000 residents were evacuated from surrounding areas, many leaving homes they would never permanently return to. Despite global fear, no immediate deaths were directly attributed to radiation exposure, but the psychological toll, displacement, uncertainty, stigma, endured for years. The tsunami's effects rippled across the Pacific Ocean. Wave surges reached Hawaii, California, and South America. Years later, debris from Japan washed ashore in North America. docks, fishing vessels, personal belongings carried across an ocean. GPS stations recorded the island of Honshu shifting eastward by over 8 feet. It was a stark reminder that geological forces operate on a scale beyond human comprehension. Economically, the disaster caused more than $200 billion in damage, making it the costliest natural disaster in recorded history. Global supply chains faltered, automotive and electronics manufacturing slowed worldwide as key Japanese factories shut down. A regional catastrophe had become a global disruption within days. In the weeks that followed, Japan entered a period of collective mourning unlike anything in its modern era. Search and rescue teams worked in freezing conditions, digging through mud and splintered timber. Temporary morgues were established in school gymnasiums as families walked slowly between rows, hoping for answers, fearing confirmation. For many, there were no remains to recover. Survivors later described the sound of the tsunami not as a wave, but as a roar, like hundreds of aircraft engines approaching at once. Even those who escaped physically unharmed carried that sound in memory. The psychological aftermath reshaped a generation. Children who experienced that day grew up understanding evacuation drills not as abstract practice, but as lived necessity. Studies in heavily affected prefectures showed elevated rates of post-traumatic stress and depression. Elderly survivors struggled most with displacement. Tight-knit coastal communities were scattered into temporary housing complexes. Recovery was not simply rebuilding infrastructure, it was rebuilding identity and social connection. Scientists reassessed long-held assumptions about seismic risk. Historical records had referenced massive tsunamis centuries earlier, but modern hazard models relied heavily on recent data. After 2011, sediment analysis revealed evidence of ancient tsunamis larger than expected. The lesson was sobering. Absence in recent memory does not equal impossibility. Coastal cities worldwide reevaluated evacuation planning and nuclear safety as some nations accelerated shifts away from nuclear energy. In the years since, one of the most powerful legacies of March 11th has been education. Across Japan, centuries-old tsunami stones have gained renewed attention. Markers placed by ancestors who survived earlier disasters, warning future generations not to build below certain elevations. For decades, some of those warnings were overlooked as towns expanded toward the sea. Now, they are treated as historical data points as valuable as modern instruments. Schools also incorporated disaster science into their curriculum. Children practice vertical evacuations and analyze real footage from 2011. The goal is not to instill fear, but memory. Because in tsunami-prone regions, memory can be the difference between hesitation and survival. Environmentally, millions of tons of debris were swept into the Pacific. Marine ecosystems absorbed sudden sediment loads while fisheries struggled to recover, not only due to physical destruction, but public fear surrounding radiation. Today, new seawalls tower above rebuilt towns. Some residents feel safer, others feel uneasy living behind concrete barriers that block their view of the ocean that once sustained them. The 2011 Tōhoku earthquake and tsunami wasn't just a catastrophic event, it was a turning point in disaster science, engineering, energy policy, and collective memory. It exposed the limits of preparation, but also the depth of resilience. March 11, 2011 was the day Japan moved. The day the ocean crossed a boundary humanity believed it understood, and the day the world was reminded that beneath every city, every coastline, every home, the earth is still alive. Thank you everybody for watching. I make new videos every week, so if you'd like to see more content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd appreciate the support.